Welcome to Sex, Love and Science with Lauren Muratore, clinical psychosexual therapist and relationship expert. This podcast explores sexuality, relationships, and the many facets in between, aiming to normalize sexual conversations, issues that we all face. Let's take the taboo out of sexuality and open up the conversations for a better sexual existence. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome back to Sex, Love and Science. Now, today's guest, I have Deb Vanderwerp. Now, Deb here is a fellow SAS member, the Sexology Association that I'm a part of. Deb is the Victorian president, and you've been the president for a while now.
This is third year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Deb actually does also dateability.
I do.
Which is why I wanted to bring you in and have some chats, because today's episode is actually about sexuality and autism, which I think is a very relevant topic. And Deb pointed out something fantastic before we actually even started. And so this episode is going to be about if you're autistic and you're having sex, or if you are not autistic and you're having sex with somebody who is. So we're going to look at every angle. And I think Deb is going to be the perfect person to talk to about this today. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having me. Any excuse to have a conversation with someone, I'm in.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, beautiful. If you like, I could just give a brief rundown of what dateability
yes, please.
is. So dateability is a program that was devised about 5 years ago by a couple of women in Adelaide who noticed that there was an incredible need for people with disabilities to have better informed education and learning and opportunities to develop skills that are around building relationships with people. They'd noticed that people with disability were being scammed at an incredibly increasing rate, that there was a disconnect, that they were hearing a disconnect between the way people felt they were able to be in the world. And then there was not a lot of support to help people find that better way to, or more skilled way to be in relationships. So they started the program. It was a 4-week program initially, about what they perceived at the time. And I am absolutely, in support of that. The process of, building a healthy relationship comes down to sort of 4 really simple parts. One of them is, knowing who you are. Mm-hmm. And understanding the fundamentals of your connection with people and what you want, what you need, that it then goes into the process of building something with somebody else. And then there's the understanding the boundaries and all of the different ways that we need to establish a healthy relationship with somebody. And then the final part is the knowledge that we have about the way we function as a body in a sexual space. So those 4 principles were originally just the 4 weeks. We now do it as an 11-week program. And the final week in the program is a social event where people actually get to connect with each other.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. I just love it so much. Yeah.
And I mean, I guess, because that's some pretty meaty information, right? So to go from 4 weeks to 11 weeks sounds pretty relevant and important and so comprehensive. I mean, understanding each part would be pretty important. Yeah.
And it's the thing that I love about the way these 2 women have developed the program is that it is in conjunction with the people that participate in the program.
Yeah.
So all of the feedback that's come in has been, we are reevaluating the program every single term. We have a meeting where we discuss things that have come up with how the different videos we use resonate, the tasks that we use, how they resonate. So it's a constantly evolving and tweaked program.
Fantastic. And so if somebody wanted to look that up, can you just sign up?
Yeah, you go through an the organisation is called First Step Solutions, and you can look them up on the internet and you'll see it all there. And it's through the NDIS. So It's an NDIS-based program. You can do it without being a member, without being on the NDIS, but then you are paying for it as an individual.
Yep. Okay.
So, yeah, that's how it works.
All right. For anybody listening, I'll pop that in the show notes.
Thank you.
So, all right, let's just dive into sexuality and autism.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, if you have been diagnosed with autism, you know what autism is.
Correct.
If you have not been diagnosed with autism, you might not have any idea other than what's going on in the media and what people are telling you. So one of the things that I thought we would just look at the term neurodiverse and we would look at sort of the bigger picture. And neurodiversity is really, in a really simple way, it is when the brain is functioning in a different way to what is seen as normal, quotation marks. And I don't like using that word, but that's the way we would see it if we were looking at sort of the basics that we would find in social media or in the media. So in a really simple way, neurodiversity means that your social interactions, the way that you communicate, the way that you enjoy the world will be perceived as different in the what we consider the mainstream. Now, that could be autism, that could be ADHD, that could be an acquired brain injury, that there's many different ways in which that manifests. Autism, though, has some specific markers that are looked for. Those, the first area is the social interaction and communication, where that process is just different. It is different. The other way that it might come up for many people is that there is a repetitive behaviour or a repetitive fixation, or it might be a really, really passionate interest that is a very specific interest. So those things are the general ideas of what autism, how it might represent or how it might present. However, one of the biggest issues that we have with the way autism is perceived, and I will, on the table, say I have not been diagnosed with autism, so it is something that I have worked with for a very long time, and I have many people in my world who are on the spectrum. But one of the things that I'm very aware of is that the spectrum was considered linear. You know, you were either very high functioning, in the style of, say, Microsoft, I can never remember the guy's name. That's Jobs, thank you. Or any of those guys. And then mostly men, and that's another thing that we'll talk about. But there's that really high functioning, very, very capable, highly intelligent, very focused on a particular interest. Or there were the autism people that kids might remember that there was a kid that they saw at the playground who was struggling to communicate at all. So it was seen as linear. It's not linear, and that's really, really important. So I tend to picture autism like a sphere, and that each sphere, so if you're looking at a mirror ball, for instance, and you're looking at the square of the mirror ball and it becomes this tiny sliver that goes right to the centre, a human being with autism will have many, many, many facets. And each of those facets will have certain degrees of functionality. So if we think about it in terms of the way we look at humans, some of us are just really coordinated. Some of us are really good at sport. Some of us become musical. Some of us have connections with animals in a way that, is different to we're all different, and our love of different things and the way that we present in different areas it's a spectrum. It's not just a linear thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's exactly what I was thinking when you were speaking, is that whether we want to be labeled neurotypical or neurodiverse or neurodivergent, we're all different.
Yes.
Which I think is important, because when we're talking about sexuality, there is no normal, which I just want to again reiterate. There is no normal, regardless of what we're diagnosed with or not diagnosed with.
100%. I guess in terms of autism and relationships and autism and sexuality, there are specific features that will be presented to the person who is on the autism spectrum, or a person who is engaging in a relationship with someone who's on the autism spectrum. And again, it's a spectrum, so it's quite diverse, but there are certain things that will be presented quite commonly, if you like.
Can I ask a very, I'm going to sound ignorant here, and I'm going to ask it anyway. So I've learned a lot about autism, I would say, in the past probably a year or two due to having a child. And so I've learned a lot of information. But quick question. What I've been educated, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, is that the word spectrum is kind of everybody's trying to deviate from that. And I've heard it used a lot. And so I'm really confused if we say autism is a spectrum or not anymore.
It depends on who you're talking to. And this is where I find it really fascinating. So up until relatively recently, we would talk about autism, we'd talk about Asperger's, and they were seen as separate conditions or separate diagnoses. It's now seen as being part of the same spectrum. So it's... When I picture autism, I see a sphere, like I said, the mirror ball.
Yep. And it's just understanding that sliver.
That sliver. And each one of those slivers representing a different functionality. However, at the moment, the term that's used.
Is it? Okay. That's okay. I don't know these things, so thank you. I appreciate
it's very... Some people get very passionate about not wanting to use that term at all and only wanting to use neurodiversity as a term. Yeah. I love using the word sliver. I love thinking about the mirror ball and thinking about the sliver. So I'm gonna maybe. Yeah, I can remember the first time I was presented with that idea, which would be probably 7 years ago now, and the thing that really became powerful for me was that I pictured all of those little mirror ball tiles having a different word on them, so that when I was a teacher at that point. So I was working with young adults, and so I'd be able to go, okay, so this is the sliver of Disney, and that that person was either loved Disney or they didn't love Disney. Often it was either one extreme or the other in the people that I worked with, or it might be their ability to recognize facial expressions, or it might be how they could play sport, and each of those little tiles, and some would be what are considered really high functioning and others would be further down and in between.
Yeah.
And so each one of those, you had to find the individual and you had to find all of their little slivers that made up the individual.
Yeah. I love it.
Which is kind of like how we need to approach all people. I
was just going to say again, we're all a bit like, but I'm deviating. So please. So I think I threw you off your train of thought. So you were talking about you're saying, okay, here's the spectrum.
Oh, and then there were different traits that are things to consider. One of the things that I find interesting is that there is a very strong correlation between neurodiverse people being attracted to neurodiverse people. Kind of makes sense. But also a lot of people are engaging in relationships with neurodiverse people who are not neurodiverse because we are more aware of it. So we now know that's what we're doing, but also because it is quite a significant percentage of the population. So we're thinking at the moment they're saying about 2%, up to about 2% of the population are on the autism spectrum. And that means we are engaging with people who are on the spectrum all the time or who are neurodiverse all the time. So we might not see that in our day-to-day. So we might be sitting in an office full of people and everyone's doing their own thing. Everyone's bringing their own lunches. Everyone's sitting in the tea room. They're either going off and getting their tea or their coffee or their whatever the thing they want to drink. We're not noticing that one person might want to stir their coffee 4 times one way, 2 times the next after they put their sugar in. We won't notice that as necessarily being aligned with a particular diagnosis, if you like, or we won't be noticing that a person's brought in their lunch and everything in that lunchbox is white because they only eat white things, and that can be a presentation of autism. So we're not necessarily noticing those things because we tend to just get on with our normal day-to-day. But when we become intimate with somebody, those things are going to become really noticeable because we're having that intimate time with a person.
Well, it's a lot different than eating your lunch at work, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Oh, just a tad.
Hopefully your sex that you're having is different than your lunch at work.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I have, if I think about when I discovered when I started discovering the impact of knowing more about autism on my work at the time, I also then realised that a number of my partners in the past had been on the spectrum, or they had symptoms of being on the spectrum, all of whom were eventually diagnosed because their children were diagnosed.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah.
So tell me, what are we looking at in when it comes to sexual intimacy?
Okie dokie. Number one is going to be the communication.
Yep.
So I'll do a case study. Or a case, and a gentleman who we're talking basically, by the way, 3 to 4 times men than women are diagnosed with autism. Yep. So very much more men. So a gentleman might have been diagnosed with autism, or might have an idea that he has got autism, has been having issues. Often autism will present with another, like anxiety or depression, often correlated too with people with autism. Some of that can be because of the circumstances of how they were raised. Some of it can be that it's a comorbidity. So a gentleman has some anxiety about his autism. He might choose not to tell his partner that he is on the spectrum. So that already sets up a communication difference in terms of I'm not revealing a significant part of who I am to my partner consciously. So that can be one of the examples straight up. So when a man with autism might, it's so individual, it's not funny. So it's hard for me to be really, really super specific. But an example, a particular gentleman has been on the spectrum. He's been diagnosed with depression. He has been on medication for depression, and his erectile function is different because of the medication he's been on. They might not communicate with you about what's going on for them, and they might not communicate with you why that's going on for them. And so you are in a situation where you're trying to provide pleasure for that man and with that man, but he's not able to give you the cues and the information to help provide that pleasure. So they will be very, that might be then a very internalized experience for him. And I can remember one case of a gentleman who, where that had happened, for example, and the only way he could achieve orgasm at all was to completely shut down the person he was with, not to notice them, think about them, experience them at all. He simply had to go into the sensation of his penis inside the vagina. That was the only way he could achieve pleasure or achieve orgasm. And that was very much his autistic way of needing to be able to focus on the sensation. And so when we're talking about sensory issues tend to be a big deal.
Correct. I was going to say that's one thing I'm very aware of.
Yeah. And that can be very diverse. So you might have a person on the autism spectrum who doesn't like using lube because they can't stand the texture of the lube. So they're having to constantly explore different textures to see if they can find one that they feel comfortable with. Or it might be they have to be very specific about the sheets that they're having sex on, or the music that's playing, or any music that's playing, or being in a space where there is not a lot of other stimulus. So there's lots and lots of factors that can come into play to allow a person to be fully in the moment of sex.
Well, I guess, yeah. And I mean, again, if I was looking almost, what you're kind of saying is somebody who's just regulating themselves, right? So it's just using all of these ways, the sensory ways to regulate, but just regulating even before you can get aroused in your body. And while that might seem rigid or a sense of rigidity to it, it's really just somebody regulating. And maybe I might compare that to some case studies in clinic or the past would be somebody who's experienced trauma or pain or something, and just the ability to regulate their body or their mind or their sense of self before they engage with intimacy.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to, again, not to pathologize or I've got a diagnosis, but if you need to regulate for whatever reason, right? I think that's fair as to let somebody know if that is you as the sexual being, or if you are the partner to allow that.
I was in preparation for today, I did another deep dive into Reddit and asking questions, to see what people are saying around do they or do they not tell people that they've been diagnosed with autism. And it was it's always a cocktail.
It's a much of a much. Yep.
But it was really interesting for me to read one post where the person said, I'm so grateful that I've had the confidence to share that with the partners that I'm with, because it allows me a starting point for the communication around what I need. And I think, in terms of what I do with Dateability and what I do with my clients, I am trying to help people be self-aware and then to be able to communicate what they need and want to the person that they're with or the people that they're with. And so that is irrelevant to diagnosis. That's just, we will be better communicators if we know ourselves, and we will be better at finding what we need if we're able to communicate that and share that without judgment with the person who we're with.
Yep, 100%.
So I guess the kinds of things that I have noticed with clients and the kinds of things that my clients I was going to actually share that one of my clients came to me recently, and he's very, very clear about what his needs are, which is amazing. He's had really, really good opportunities to learn these skills. So he came into the first session and said, okay, because I'm autistic, I need to know these things. I need to know how to maintain my friendship, find new friendships, how to read emotions better, how to be able to identify body language better, how to know that I'm getting consent, and how do I get a partner and keep one and have babies. I went, okay, great.
Wow.
Very clear.
Yes.
But this same young person, or this same man, younger than me, that's why I identify young person, sorry, is that there are regular stims, so repetitive behaviours to help him regulate. Some of those stims might appear to be unusual when you first meet him, or sensory issues. He will choose a particular T-shirt that he's comfortable wearing, and he will only want to wear that T-shirt. So he'll have 2 or 3 of those T-shirts, so they're always washed. He will have at times, and these are things that he identifies as well. So he will say, well, I have very restricted interests. I know exactly what I like to do and what I don't like to do. I know how I like to be touched and how I don't like to be touched. So that's really important data, really important information for the person that you want to be with.
Oh, yeah.
And so part of what I'm doing is also going, well, sex is a negotiation. Yes, there are boundaries that we set, but, just because we say we don't like Brussels sprouts today doesn't mean we're going to not like Brussels sprouts for the rest of our lives. So it's that constant check-in of what we do and don't like. Hey, I really like it when you touch my breast in this way. And if the person says, well, I don't want to suck your nipples because that just feels creepy. Well, maybe there's another way that you can stimulate my nipples. It becomes that conversation around what makes both people feel comfortable. It's perfectly reasonable to say, I don't want to do that because I find that texture icky, or I don't find that, that's an immediate turn off. But it's also important I need something to keep me moist. So it's that constant negotiation, discussion, and
yeah. And I mean, we can liken a bit of that to kind of like Dr. Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent. Am I touching somebody the way they want to be touched, or how I want to be touched, and negotiating each of those. Yeah. Whether we're neurodiverse or neurotypical.
Exactly. Probably the other couple of things that are important, and I use this metaphor a lot, is that I see people who are non-typical and people who are neurotypical. We're like a battery. And so, if we get an old battery, like our mobile phone battery, that battery's going to go flat fairly quickly unless it's recharged. A brand new battery will last really well. But the bottom line is that there will be things that drain that battery much faster than other things. So a person who's neurotypical probably isn't going to have their battery drained if they live on a main road and there's lots of cars going backwards and forwards. But if you're bringing a lover home who is neuro-non-typical, that might drain their battery incredibly quickly. So their capacity to manage their feelings and their arousal is going to be affected by that. And again, that becomes communication. So it might be when a person says, well, I would prefer you to come to my place than me go to your place. That might be so that they can better regulate and allow themselves to become more aroused or be able to sustain that arousal or that connection without their battery draining.
What a fabulous example. Thank you. I think that is absolutely brilliant, because I mean, even that goes outside of the bedroom is also just looking at our partner or other people in our life and understanding what kind of battery they have.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think I love it. I'm gonna pinch that.
You
one.
absolutely.
I'm pinching it.
It's not unique. It's not. I borrowed it actually got that one from an autism website that I regularly attend, but many, many years ago now. It's been around for a little while. But it's so visual and it's so easy to understand in our current state of life. Yeah.
Correct. And I mean, and I'll just kind of derail us for a second, but as a parent, I know what's going to drain a battery.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of, moving with that and very aware and going, okay, well, if I've drained the battery or if this has happened, I know X, Y, and Z is going to start happening, and it does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all right, let's take that mother-child relationship and transition it to adults, and we have two partners, but it's still having the ability to, I know you're going to get drained, and I know what you're going to need to regulate.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really good point. Thank you.
And it was, for me, was really interesting and, sort of self-disclosure for a second, but I had a lover who, if we were going to be physical for an extended period of time, one of the ways that he needed to regulate was that we needed to go and watch some ridiculously silly comedy for a little while in the middle of it all.
Okay.
And it was just, we'd go and sit on the couch and we'd laugh together, and it was the laughter that allowed him to bring back his battery. And it was always really interesting because I like to talk. And so I like to talk when I'm intimate. So that was difficult for him. So we had to moderate that. And one of the ways to moderate that was that he got his laughter therapy, if you like, in the middle of that process. So that was one of the ways. And I found that really interesting because I discovered that. I wasn't told that, but from observation, I went, wow, this seems to be happening regularly. And then I checked in. So how does this work for you?
Yeah.
How is this helping? I don't understand why we're doing this. And, now I understand. Yeah, great. Thanks.
And that goes back to whoever you're with, it's learning how to negotiate with them.
Absolutely.
Looking for the cues. And I mean, I think that's a skill that takes I don't know, that's a whole nother conversation. Is that teachable? But I mean, I talk a lot about, attunement or, I guess really tapping into somebody being quite intuitive and how that's a really important act of being a lover.
Yeah. Yeah. I can never say this word. Reciprocity is a really big, tool that I try to teach when I'm working, especially with people who are neurodiverse. And I try not to, I call it give and take because I've struggled with reciprocity to say it properly. But it's that recognition that we have to have the space and create the space to understand what needs to give and take. And that means that we're making a commitment to that relationship and to improving the ability to communicate and give pleasure and give space to what's needed in that relationship and in the bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and exactly the more you do that, and I guess in a relationship, of course, that's going to grow and can continue. But I think I would also say that you could do that in a one-night stand or, it's...
If you're good at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're the kind of person who has the tools and the skill set to bring all that to the table with you, whether it's for one night or whether it's for a long-term relationship. Absolutely. And some people are really, really good at that. Yeah, absolutely.
No,
Or with more than one person for that matter.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're just multitasking then.
Yeah. It just takes a little bit more work, and you might need to be very mindful of your battery.
I was just going to say your battery gets drained.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the one other one is the overwhelm, and that's probably a very common neurodiverse trait, that it becomes very easy for the battery to drain very fast and often not when you want it to.
Yeah.
So that's another trait, I guess. I do believe the skills can be learnt.
Yep. Okay.
I do believe that you can learn to recognise emotions. I do believe that almost all of my clients that I have worked with specifically around learning those skills, it might take a long period of time, but because they're new skills. But I've not yet had an experience where I haven't seen that able to be done. No, but then I'm working with a particular cohort.
That's a fair point. And I guess that really says, yes, with communication, which is kind of like the overarching kind of theme that you're talking about, is the more you can do that, all of these other skills that we're kind of talking about and as they're practiced can be fine-tuned.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if any. Am I allowed to mention resources?
Yes.
I was thinking about the book Unique that Jodie Rogers wrote from Love on the Spectrum.
Yep.
Jodie Rogers. There was a case that she put in there which I absolutely it resonated with me so much with my clients. Was a young man and he described his relationship as being like his special interest. When he met this woman, she was his special interest for a very long time. And when they got married, he didn't need it to be the special interest anymore because now it was secure and he had this.
Yeah.
And so he stopped engaging and stopped making her the center of his life, which made her feel very disconnected and very much like she'd been rejected after they got married. And when he went and spoke to Jodie, because she's a psychologist that works with neurotypical people, he didn't realize that it was something he was going to have to maintain, that you have to maintain your interest in the relationship for the relationship to continue. So they worked out that they would schedule time to make love, time to communicate, time to talk about the relationship, the things that she had loved about their courting process. That to me was really, really profound example of how the skill, if you understand why you need to do something, then it becomes easy to do it, especially if you care.
Yeah, exactly. And I run through all of those skills with my clients, irrespective of neurodivergent or neurotypical. Here's where the relationship's needing some work, and here's the road.
Yeah. The big difference for what I often hear with people who are not who are neurotypical, who start engaging with someone who's neurotypical, that a lot of especially the women that I've spoken to who are in relationships with men with autism, that the men have an incredibly strong interest somewhere, and that interest will often be absolutely a hyper focus when they're doing it. And so getting the attention back on them can often be quite challenging. And that's communication. That's absolutely about, hey, I know that you really, really, really want to go down on me, and that's really, really important to you, and you really love doing that, but I'd also like you to give me attention elsewhere.
Yep.
So it's that kind of communication. Yeah. And they can be learned.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
That's probably sums it up.
Thanks. Well, I think those are some really great points for anybody listening. So, I mean, hopefully if you're with somebody, a partner, a lover who might identify as neurodivergent and who might have some of these, you can be aware and potentially even sometimes lead the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in your example, I'm noticing this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And let's bring it over here and maybe, right? So sometimes, we have to lead by example or, start things. And I think that's a really good cue.
Yeah. And I guess it comes down to also that thing of that we don't make one person have to carry the mental load of that on their own. And that's probably step one. That, we're going to do this together. So, yeah.
I love that. We're going to do this together. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming around, Deb. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And hopefully everyone listening got some tips for today. All right. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks.